What's up, bro? Came to.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, so after.
What's that?
This game might be after.
Oh, right, yeah.
What's your turn?
Huh? Picture no?
I am Abhi. Oops. Should we wait for Professor Ashman?
Yes.
Yeah.
Let's see if it's coming.
मैं pause कर देता हूँ. Start कर दो.
I have the P. Did you have a chance to go over the document, Professor? I know it was pretty hefty.
I did, yeah. Hey,
Hello.
Want me to turn the lights on? Or?
I'm fine. Whatever makes you comfortable.
I was just thinking the presentation was
Works. That works.
washed out.
Works for me.
Thank you. Alright, thank you all for being here. My name is Salif, presenting my thesis defense for my master's. My thesis focused on efficient adaptations for large language models and whether they reduce safety and the scale of safety, and if there is a trade-off observed in fine-tuning your large language models. So, is there a jailbreak trade-off observed? So, thank you all for being here, and let's get started. Sorry for the bright side, but here's the roadmap right now. We'll just go over the motivation first, why the question itself matters, what further questions are derived from it, the methodology used, experimental design, results analysis, discussions, and then the conclusion and limitations and future work. So, first of all, parameter efficient fine-tuning encompasses a lot of techniques and is now widely accessible. This in turn makes using large language models much more accessible as well. In a sense, it democratizes them so people can use and adapt them for their downstream tasks much more easily. So, for example, a 14 billion parameter model can now be adapted on a single GPU, a consumer grade GPU, and that makes it easy to use it for whatever task you prefer. So, secondly, we know that safety alignment is fragile in these large language models. It's encoded in approximately 3% of its parameters, and that can be affected when you're fine-tuning the model itself. Prior work has shown that even techniques like full fine-tuning, of course, when you're updating all the parameters of the models, you do end up perturbing those weights that are safety alignment weights as well. But even the goal here is to show if and investigate if lower parameter modification techniques such as LoRa and QLoRa can also affect those alignments. And finally, jailbreak attacks themselves are evolving every year almost. They're going from like simple text-based perturbations to more logical ones to confuse the language models themselves, more semantic-based, more persona-based, ASCII art, also obfuscation, as we'll see further in this study, and the threat landscape is ever evolving. So the core question it boils down to is, does efficient adaptation, which makes models much more easier to use, does it preserve safety or weaken it? So the problem framing itself and questions you can derive from it, like does modifying more weights lead to greater safety degradation in models? So compared to full fine-tuning, law of fine-tuning, Q-law of fine-tuning. And then threat model dependence. So the same attacks that you're going to use for black box attacks, are they generalizable to white box themselves? Black box attacks obviously have perhaps API access, semantic access to the model themselves. White box would have access to the weights, gradients of the large language model as well. And then, since there's a lot of studies and recent works being done with using large language models as judges and as evaluators, can you inherently trust them as well for your evaluations, for your annotations as well? Or is there a chance of there being a reliability trade-off in using certain evaluators as well? So this study uses 3 evaluators for this investigation as well. The research questions, these are categorized according to the, these are categorized according to different tiers. So first, we're talking about, for example, does fine-tuning on benign data, does it impact fine-tuning? Because this study uses a benign data set for the fine-tuning purposes for the models. So as there is no adversarial bias in fine-tuning or whatever task you're fine-tuning them on. So does fine-tuning, does that iterate robustness? Does the effect vary model by model family, by model by family, and which attacks themselves are like more effective? Are the persona ones more effective? Are the perturbation, are the ASCII obfuscation attacks more effective? The second category comes into generalizability, measurements of generalizability. This tests whether the evaluators that we discussed formerly, are they agreeing, and to what extent are they agreeing, and to what extent are they disagreeing, and which evaluators can you inherently trust, or can you trust like a mixture of them or just one? And do the findings generalize across the benchmark? So there will be 2 benchmarks conducted in the study for evaluating the adversarial nature of these models and testing whether these findings generalize across them. And finally, the safety utility trade-off question is interesting because you would typically think that a model that is going to refuse attacks would inherently be more safe. But does that come at a cost? Does if you're making a model more safer, is there and if it's going to produce less ASR values, less attack success rates, is it also going to be less usable so that it denies even benign prompts, even simple tasks that you give it, and just identifies them as adversarial? Contributions here are a large-scale empirical factorization using 25 configs. These are derived from 5 models and 5 configs per model, so it results in 25 configs overall across the 5 models. For attacks, these are 3 black box based, 1 white box, 2 benchmarks, and 3 evaluators. The separation of black box and white box was inherent here because black box attacks themselves reveal different patterns than white box ones, and we would have confounding results if they were not separated, so that was also done. There was statistical analysis also conducted to make sure that how fine-tuning techniques compare across one another and how they generalize across black and white box attacks. Characterization of 4-bit simple quantization was also conducted as to see if it inherently has an effect as well, which was found out to be generally safety neutral, although with some caveats that we will later observe. Human calibrated evaluator design is also present. So the evaluators were checked against a ground truth label, annotator labels labeled by me, and it was checked like which evaluator is more consistent with human calibrated annotations. Finally, discovery of evaluator dependent safety utility correlation. We'll observe later that across one evaluator, a trend is observed but not across the others. So again, evaluator dependentness is very much observed here. Once again, going across methodology just to make sure this results in approximately 600 measurements across all these calculations, and 50 over-refusal measurements. These were conducted against 2 evaluators. So a third evaluator was not used for the over-refusal measurements, but the same 5 model families, the same configs, and across a benign data set was used for all our measurements. The model families here are the Gemma 2 model, 9 billion parameters, Llama 3.1, which was approximately 8, so they were comparable in size. They were also selected like based on a range of model parameter sizes that make sense for consumer hardware and easier to fine tune and easier to use for your further tasks. Quen 3 and Quen 2.5. Quen 3 was on the lower side here, 4 billion parameters. Quen 2.5 was the higher parameter model, approximately 14 billion, and another 14 billion parameter 5.4 was also chosen for a comparative study. But all these models are instruct-based models, so they have inherently safety alignment. Obviously, all models do, but these ones would have specifically different safety alignments as well. And to compare that across model sizes, 5.4 was chosen as a base model just to compare it with Quen 2.5, which is a similar model size. And configurations here are, again, like I mentioned, the 25 configs across 5 models across 5 configs. So FP16, just the base model itself, and FP16 precision, base 4-bit is just the quantized version of those model weights to 4 bits. The LoRa version and QLoRa and fully fine-tuned versions. And yes, for all fine-tuned models were trained on the PICA benign dataset for one epoch just to simulate a quick fine-tuning. So it would present us with the lower bound of results. So if you were to train for more epochs, maybe you could observe even higher correlation than results as well. And just a random seed of 42 given prior tasks, following prior tasks was also selected. The attacks themselves were 4 in number, and 3 were black box in nature, 1 altered and attack was white box. These pair uses LLM as an attacker, another LLM, Mistral 7 billion parameter model in this case. It uses the model to perturb and the semantics or the prompt, whatever you're inputting to the model, and finding which adversarial prompt eventually succeeds. Deep inception relies on a persona-based approach and a layer within layer approach. So you would have prompts, adversarial prompts within adversarial prompts in a layered fashion, and thus the name Deep Inception as well from the movie Inception. The art prompt attack was using ASCII-based obfuscation. It would encode the harmful or the adversarial verbs or the characters, whatever or the task you were inputting to the model as an ASCII art, and it would basically test the model's visual ability as well to some extent. So these black box attacks were like pretty diverse in their methodology, and then the autodone attack was used as a comparison to the white box ones. It needs obviously access to the model weights, model logics, and it uses what the paper described as hierarchical genetic search for prompts. And these prompts are actually translatable across different models as well. So yes, primary analysis on black box, supplemental on white box, and moving on to the evaluators. As previously mentioned, a study was conducted, annotation was conducted for 100 behaviors themselves, for 100 outputs from the model themselves, and they were compared with the outputs of the models, so making sure like there was no bias involved. I did them myself, and it emerged that the primary model to prefer was the Llama 2 13 billion model because it had the highest precision across all the human annotations as well, and a very low false positive rate, although its false negative rate was a bit higher than the secondary model. But the secondary model, even though it had a pretty good recall, it would identify almost all the jailbreaks, almost all the real adversarial outputs as being correct, but it would also have a very high false positive rate, and even benign outputs would be classified as being adversarial. And then a supplemental third evaluator was also used just for comparison's sake. The key metrics here are ASR, which is the attack success rate. It measures the percentage of behaviors that got some sort of harmful output from the model that whatever you were attacking. So harm bench had 400 behaviors. Jailbreak bench the other days had 100 behaviors. Those 100 were more curated, more harmful in their approach, but still you could compare both of them, the ASRs for both of them, and the delta ASR here measures the impact you would have. So comparing the base model ASR against whatever config you were using, so against the 4 other configs. If it's positive, the ASR, then it's a safety degradation. If it's negative, it's actually a defense in your safety. And then the over-refusal rate is just measuring how many of the benign prompts were actually refused by the model. So benign prompts are supposed to be, they're supposed to maybe look like they're adversarial in nature, although the model is supposed to answer them. Right, before going to the results, just an overview of them, all the fine-tuning models actually did produce statistically significant degradations, almost all the techniques, LoRa, QLoRa, and full fine-tuning. The model family matters a lot, so the model, it was not generalizable if attacks would be the same across model families, and the threat model changes the pattern. So those same attacks were producing quite a lot of different results across black box and across white box attacks. The evaluator choice, as I've mentioned, matters a lot, and we shall see in the coming slides. So first of all, the first research question that we asked, does fine-tuning, does it degrade safety, and to what extent? And yes, it does. In this case, we're focusing on black box attacks themselves. We can clearly see that PEFT shows the absolute ASR a bit lower than FFT. Full fine-tuning obviously does degrade the most amount of safety in models because it is obviously updating almost all the weights involved in those models. But QLoRa is not far behind, and then it is followed by LoRa. Finally, base 4-bit, just 4-bit quantization does to some extent erode safety, but the results themselves are not statistically significant. As you can see, the error bars here were going below 0, so we couldn't call it as positively confirmed. Moving on to the next research question. The model family here again matters a lot. So as you can see, the 5-4 model was the most vulnerable, even though it had the strongest base ASR value. So it had the lowest ASR values, and yet whenever it was fine-tuned, it would result in the most catastrophic results, as you can see here. Almost 16.2 percentage points compared to its base model. So fully fine-tuning exacerbates those results a lot. LoRa fine-tuning here is also pretty harmful. The Llama 3.1 model was actually found out to be the most resilient across all black box attacks here. No significant degradation across any of the attacks actually, but as we mentioned before, QLoRa is very much safety neutral, but it has a lot of variance. As you can see in the Gemma 2 model, it actually produced the highest ASR amongst all attacks, even more than the fully fine-tuned version of itself. So again, model by model variance is observed a lot, and for any downstream task you would be fine-tuning your models on, it would be necessary to have an idea of what models you're going to use and what kind of fine-tuning you're going to use, so it makes it easier to understand what models to use and what attacks to prepare for. Okay, moving on to the attack effectiveness. Across the three black box attacks, deep inception attack was found to be the most effective here. It obviously exploits the persona manipulation, multi-layered nature of it, and it produces the most devastating results across all the attacks. Here, a comparison between both evaluators is provided, although the Llama 2 evaluator is more closer to the human annotation results than the GPT-4 Omni, which tends to over-report or be a bit more trigger-happy, you could say, in reporting its ASR values. Although the ranking is stable across both evaluators, as you can see that deep inception is more deadlier than here, which is followed by RCOM, and this is reflected in the results of both attackers. So in case of our attack effectiveness, we have an answer here for the black box attacks. For the white box, there is a clear divergence across compared to the black box results. So the LoRa protective effect that we observed when using black box attacks is actually more towards a defensive. The LoRa protective effect that was observed in black box attacks is not as clearly observed here. Although in case of the Llama 3.1 model, you can observe that it is much lower. The ASR values plummet a lot, so here LoRa acts as a defensive, almost fine-tuning configuration compared to the base model. And this is also reflected in another model, which is Quen 2.5. Again, compared to the base model, LoRa model has much lower ASR values, but FFT is consistent across both models. Fully fine-tuning does really devastate the ASR values across both models and is quite potent. But the LoRa effect is not really generalizable across both models. Even though it may be great safety in black box, it may produce a protective effect here, as you can see. One plausible explanation is that, and again, these are the white box attack here is autoland, so since it uses the weights of the model itself, maybe an explanation would be that LoRa changes the landscape for the weights of the models that the autoland attack uses in its approach, and maybe that affects its. Since it may have been trained on a base model, it may be different in using it on a LoRa adapted model, so it may produce a protective effect in that case. Sorry, going back to the slide again, just one point to note. White box attacks, obviously, in real world are not as common, so the results should more be inclined towards black box attacks, in my personal opinion, because these attacks require unrealistic access to a model, and which you would not find in the real world. And black box attacks thus are more common, more widely tested as well. But for comparison's sake, white box comparison was also conducted. So for the evaluators themselves, the reason that the Llama 2 evaluator was preferred is because it has a much higher precision and is more closely calibrated to human annotations compared to the GPT-4 Omni, which has a very high false positive rate. almost the mean ASR values reported by the GPT-4 or Mini and the Llama 2 model differ almost by 25 points, which is more than the effect observed by the techniques themselves. So almost 4 times the effect observed by the techniques themselves. So as you might remember, fully fine-tuning had an effect of 6.8 percentage points. So that's almost 4 times. So it really matters here what evaluator you're using, and it can obviously come down to how much false positives you're reporting, how much false negatives you're reporting, and affect all your downstream results and your tasks as well. So for the cross dataset generalizability, this was also conducted just to ensure that the attacks and the models themselves are generalizable across both data sets, and there isn't much of a variance observed or a different effect observed. So black box has a moderate to strong agreement across both the harm-based dataset and the jailbreak-based dataset. Obviously, jailbreak reports higher ASR values, maybe because it's more of a curative dataset, again, has much lower behaviors to exploit but more potent, but harm-based has more behaviors to exploit and which are more generalizable as well. White box shows almost near perfect correlation between both data sets, so it is for downstream evaluations you can assume that you can generalize both of these data sets for both black and white box attacks. And the relative rankings, as you can see, are more stable. So absolute ASR's values may differ across both data sets, but the rankings themselves for those models for whatever attack you're observing would relatively be the same. And finally, coming to the last research question, which was a safety utility trade-off. It is observed, although only under one evaluator here. So under the Llama 2 evaluator, which was closely calibrated to human annotations, there is a negative correlation observed between the over-refusal and mean ASR rate. So that means that a model that is more prone to producing harmful outputs is also more prone to not refuse any input you give it. So a model that is, and vice versa, so a model that is more safer in its properties would also refuse even more benign prompts as a result. So it would have a harder time distinguishing between genuinely benign prompts and adversarial attacks. So and again, this is only observed on one evaluator, not the GPT-4 Mini evaluator, so it underlines the importance of having calibration, a precision calibration in evaluator choice. So for GPT-4 Mini, that effect or that correlation is not as obvious over here, which is also a byproduct of its high false positive rate. All right, moving on to just the discussions and the implications of the work. Adaptation itself, so using any form of adaptation, be it fine-tuning, fully fine-tuning, LoRa fine-tuning, or Q-LoRa fine-tuning, does exacerbate the effect of adversarial attacks on models. Safety degradation comes from the act of adaptation itself, but the absolute values may differ across the different techniques that you use. And there's clearly a black box and white box difference, which can be further explored, of course, which is a part of the limitations of the work as well. But black box inherently do produce different results, which are not generalizable across the white box attacks, and the LoRa protective effect that was observed on the white box autodan attack should not be generalized to work on the black box attacks as well. Finally, the alignment resilience is architecture dependent, so it depends on the model providers themselves. If they have more of a sparse safety alignment or a more dense safety alignment, In my case, I would presume it to be that Llama 3.1, because it was more resistant to black box attacks. Maybe it had a more sparse safety alignment. So when using LoRa fine tuning, you would perturb much less of its weights, but maybe 5.4 had a much more dense fine tuning safety alignment approach. So when fine tuning, you could actually accidentally perturb those safety alignment weights themselves. And for practitioners, for anyone using fine tuning on consumer accessible models, it's clear that post adaptation you need to have safety evaluations, whatever downstream task you have. So evaluate safety only right after you adapt your models, whether through LoRa or fine tuning, and prioritize persona manipulation, because we saw that deep inception is an attack which is much more potent in its nature and much more prone to exacerbate your safety fine tuning. Finally, quantization is lower risk. If you were to use just a quantized model, it would generally result in near safety neutral results, but it is not risk-free. As we saw, there are some cases such as the Quant 2.5 model where even quantization can result in anomalous results. The limitations of this work are here very clear. So the single random seed is used across all the evaluations, across all the measurements, across all 600 measurements, but maybe perhaps a multi-seed evaluation could further solidify if those results are observed, or the results are like significant or not. Within family samples, so these refer to how so for example, there's only 3 black box attacks, and then across 2 data sets, maybe that could be further expanded, and so that results in like 6 pairs maybe, and then Autodan, the white box attack has 1 attack across both data sets, so it results in a value of just 2. So again, that is also something that could be further expanded, but again, that would require much more compute time. The Autodan attack alone in this study took around more than like 1,000 GPU hours, so it was quite taxing in its implementation. There was obviously a single training dataset used, the alpaca dataset. It's a benign dataset in its implementation, but it can obviously you can have different results if you were to use different training datasets. Perhaps your requirements would be, for example, a medical downstream task or a legal downstream task. It depends on whatever dataset you use. This one just had instruction following, so that whatever task you gave, it would help. It would train it to be more helpful in that way. But across different datasets, that might be different again. And then the 4 billion to 14 billion parameter range for the models is also narrow. It can be further improved since small language models are much more common now, and you can go lower than 4 billion as well. And again, you can obviously go more than 14 billion as well, but then again, the focus for this study was focusing more on consumer accessible models, which are like maybe you're able to train on just one single GPU, and maybe you could expand that number a bit more than 14 billion too. And then, so naturally the future directions become maybe having a safety preserving PEF method. So we only observe PEF methods that exacerbate the safety. Maybe a mitigation would also be helpful just for comparison's sake, and if that would result in what results that would give us. A analysis of LoRa's white box protection. So since this was conducted just for one attack, maybe translates into different results across different white box attacks. So LoRa might exhibit different results across different white box attacks. And then human evaluation was limited to 100 annotations, which I did personally. This can also be further improved, maybe 300 or 400, 500 annotations, just to have more confidence in the evaluator's reliability as well. Finally, multi-turn and multimodal robustness wasn't focused in this study, which also can be incorporated. Multi-turn attacks are more common now, engaging a LLM in conversation to exploit its adversarial nature, and multimodal attacks are also exploiting the visual dimension as well. And just concluding here with the main points from the work itself: fine-tuning consistently degrades black box safety no matter the approach you use. Fully fine-tuning LoRa or QLoRa, but then again, the scale of the fine-tuning matters as well. So fully fine-tuned modifies almost all parameters. QLoRa also modifies more parameters than LoRa itself. So there is a pattern we see in the observed ASR values as well. Attack mechanisms, they affect the safety impact as well. So the same attack might not generalize across both black box and white box. The same fine-tuning method might not generalize across white box and black box. And the evaluator choice is also very important. It determines all your results, all your conclusions, and having a human annotation as reference is very helpful. Such as we saw in the safety utility trade-off, which was not visible under one evaluator but was under another. And then full-bit quantization is generally safe, has its caveats. Some models are very much exploited, although on average it comes out to be nearly zero and not significant. Finally, model family, whatever task you're downstreaming, you're using for your downstream task, the model family matters a lot. The same attacks might not generalize across model families. So it's a very multi-dimensional assessment across all models, across attacks, and defending LLMs requires thinking and looking at the bigger picture. Thank you for your time, and I would appreciate any questions that you have.
Yeah, I've got at least one. I think more based on the conversation with you. But one of the things that I was thinking about was the section we were talking about the future work. You mentioned multimodal. Are you describing multimodal as the same as a mixture of experts? Or
Sorry.
I just wanted to clarify if that was the same for you or not.
I was thinking more towards the multimodal in the sense of using visual models as well, so like VLMs maybe, and if the same attacks would translate, this is the same across those as well. So, like how an image-based input would result, if it would result in the same results that we observed across fine-tuning configurations as well.
So then my follow-up would be, do you think studying the mixture of experts that has kind of risen would kind of apply to some future work things, or did I just miss you talking about that in the paper before?
No, I did not mention that, but that is a very good observation, of course. Mixture of experts models, like they do allow for smaller models as a result as well, since you have lower activation parameters at a time. That would also be something to think of, look into, and maybe thinking models themselves as well, since they are also popular. That was something that I was thinking of including in my initial plan, since comparing thinking models versus their non-thinking counterparts, maybe if that has a different effect as well on the robustness to adversarial attacks. But I generalized it down to the most popular models. These models that I chose were like on Hugging Face's repository, they almost always had millions of downloads as well. So they were being used by a lot of people for whatever task. They would have some millions of monthly downloads. That would mean they are being used in the real world. So testing them for this investigation was necessary. That was my focus.
Yeah, 100%. So just for clarification, I'm not suggesting that you should have included that in your full study, but just as a potential, because it's been, there's been such a popularity rise in
Yes.
them, and I'm just curious if you had a chance to even tangentially look at how some of the adversarial attacks maybe work differently towards a mixture of experts versus not, but it was more of like a, so it's not a bad thing that you didn't focus on it, so don't take my question as you should have.
No, of course, thank you.
Yeah. I'll let somebody else ask before I ask some more.
So I have a question that may not be completely in the scope of your work, but related. In the literature, there must be many more fine-tuning algorithms.
Yes.
A, why the choice of LoRa, QLoRa, and FFT? And B, are there any algorithms in the literature who claim that they do not degrade safety regardless of model? And if not, that's fine. If not, in theory, can there be a research avenue where we're designing? Wait, I'll let you answer that, then I'll get to this.
No, of course. LoRa and QLoRa were chosen for us because they are amongst the most common fine-tuning approaches and amongst the most, like, how do you describe it, consistent and like the first. QLoRa is obviously built on top of LoRa. LoRa was something that made it easier for millions of people to have much more access to a model, like, and train only a very small subset of parameters. So like it ranges from approximately 0.3 to 0.8% of the whole parameters. So like if you have maybe 175 billion parameter model, you could use just one GPU and have LoRa fine-tuning on top of it. So it was pretty common, that was why it was selected, and QLoRa is just an extension of that. Also very common and popular work, further makes it even more possible to use even higher models and like fine-tune them for your goals. I did not look into any attacks that claim to have like no safety degradations as a result of like fine-tuning, fine-tuning efforts, but that could be a potential investigation. Obviously, so these attacks these fine-tuning efforts showed us that almost every fine-tuning effort would result in some sort of safety degradation, but I did not observe any in my literature review any fine-tuning effort that suggested that this does not. That was not an angle that was actually considered in the literature reviews themselves. There were different studies conducted that actually studied the effects of fully fine-tuning. So, and when coming across those studies, I like presumed that since LoRa is also an fine-tuning method, maybe it's also worth investigating. So it is shown that fully fine-tuning does obviously affect the model's robustness. It degrades it a lot. LoRa and QLoRa aren't as investigated, so that was something that I was interested in as well.
So they're common probably because they're computationally inexpensive compared to other techniques?
Yes.
Okay, so in your literature search, you've not seen any claims around fine-tuning algorithms where they're able to preserve the safety property of the baseline model, right?
It was not an angle actually they considered in the first place.
Okay.
It was different studies, like external studies that would actually study these fine-tuning methods themselves to compare. They wouldn't necessarily study LoRa and QLoRa, but they will almost always study fully fine-tuning and how it exacerbates the robustness.
Now I have a question that might be beyond the domain but related. In theory, based on your findings, do you think there can be a research direction where you're trying to develop, let's say, a new type of fine-tuning algorithm which could derive its roots from one of these or not?
Yes.
In theory, can you design an algorithm that does not impact the safety properties, and can it even improve the safety properties while fine-tuning?
Yes, there are efforts into looking into just fine-tuning methods that do improve safety fine-tuning. They don't necessarily again then focus on the performance on downstream tasks, but they do focus on like knowing like if you can just fine-tune a model. So there is a study called Safe LoRa. There's also a study called Vaccine, if I believe correctly, and they were mentioned in the paper themselves that there do exist studies that can adapt models just for safety purposes, but not those studies exactly that have like while preserving safety and improving performance. So that could be a research direction too. Yes.
I'll let others ask
Yeah.
questions.
Do you have any questions before we go?
I don't know if this is in the thesis or not, but do you have any speculation on why all fine tuning cause safety degradation?
I have a speculation that inevitably almost all fine tuning techniques interfere with the safety parameters inside every model. So, and there was a study conducted on this. It's called the, it's not coming to the top of my head, but it was a study conducted for the LoRa model, and studying if like how much like does it affect the safety over time. So like if you were to fine tune a model and like based on the frequency of weight updates, what's the probability that you would inevitably affect one of the weights that have safety alignment in them? And it was found that it's almost 100% every time that if you were to use SafeLoRa, you were going to interfere with those safety aligned parameters and weights. So if LoRa can do that, fully fine tuning of course can do that because it updates much more parameters than that. QLoRa obviously updates like almost the same number of parameters, but because it quantizes them as well, so there's more noise on those parameters as well. So maybe that's why that would make sense. So probabilistically, it would almost always interfere with those parameters. That's why.
Yeah, so I guess I'm gonna preface by saying that I haven't done, my background isn't enough into the actual fine tuning part, so this might be a dumb question. I'm gonna preface that there. But in the way that you talked about using the fine tuning models, my understanding is that it's all based off of, because you mentioned the limitation is having just a single random seed. So if you were to run a fine tuning model on like whatever llama that you chose, and then you then reinstalled a different version of, or that same version of llama, ran the LoRa on it again, different parameters are potentially going to be affected between the two, right?
Yes.
And different parameters are going to be affected between all of the different language models in general.
Yes.
So my main question is, how do you determine the comparison if you don't really know, or are you comparing the actual parameter changes to each other? Does that make
Between
sense?
the models.
Yeah. So between the models would be harder, but even if it's the same model, so like if I were
Yes.
to, on all of this whole row of computers right here,
Mm-hmm.
install llama, whatever that would run on here,
Mm-hmm.
ran LoRa on every single one of these,
Mm-hmm.
every single one is going to have different parameters that are going to be affected, and then even those same parameters are going to be tweaked differently.
If you were to randomize the seed, maybe is that what you?
Well, even if it wasn't randomized, some things would still be different, right? I guess that's my question.
No, I don't think. If you were to use the same seed, the same hyperparameters, you would, probabilistically, you would have to observe almost the same effects. If you were to use a different seed, for example, you would have a different, maybe starting point for your fine tuning purposes. It would affect the overall results you get. Not by much. There shouldn't be very significant changes, but yes, if you were to maybe use different seeds, there would be different results. The limitation here is just for the sake of mentioning that maybe in the fine tuning efforts where the results were very minimal, maybe if we were to use different seeds, they could have gone either way. So they could have increased or decreased. So it would strengthen our conclusions much more with in which direction they're gonna move.
Alright, I'll go with my second question. So, the flip side of ASR is ORR, right?
I wouldn't exactly call it flip side, but it's a helpful metric to measure along with ASR. Yes.
When you're reducing your ASR,
Yes.
you might end up with a higher ORR. That was one of your research questions.
Yes,
What was the
technically yes.
So what was the result of RQ6?
So, if you come here, yes, it would result in, so if a model is more prone to refusing, just outright refusing prompts and inputs, and it just outright says that maybe I cannot help with that input or that topic, it might also refuse much more benign prompts which are not adversarial in nature. So ORR study was conducted for benign prompts. These
Which one is the ORR one?
well,
Same chart you have.
these
ORR
are across both
y-axis.
evaluators, yes.
Okay.
The over-refusal rate across both evaluators.
So when it comes to the black box attacks, clearly the ORR is getting high as the ASR is going low in these experiments, right?
When it comes to black box attacks, yes, if there's a higher ASR observed, so it means the model is more prone to just answering and not.
And this over refusal rate at 60%, is that 60% of the overall prompts, or what does that percentage mean?
Over refusal rate of 60% means, so if you were to give it 100, so I had 100 benign prompts to give every model. So of those 100 models, how many benign prompts it actually just flat out refused to answer? So Coin 3 here comes out to be the most safest, the green model here. But then again, it has a lower ASR, but it also has a very high over refusal rate. Yeah, it means that it even though it's sacrificing usability for the sake of its safety aspect.
Technically, that model is almost useless, right? If it's refusing 65% of your
Yes,
prompts.
those benign prompts are obviously structured to be eliciting, like, for if you were to observe them as a human, you would know that they are playing on words as well. Although they are harmless in nature, they do appear to the model as being like harmful. So they come off as harmful. That's why it refuses them, even though the model should comply with them.
So, are those like, is that data set of benign prompts, is it like engineered to trick the AI?
Yes. So it's a subset of the jailbreak bench dataset itself.
So what about like regular prompts, like prompts that shouldn't trick, like if someone's not trying to trick the AI?
Yes.
Do you have measurements on such prompts?
So
Or are all of the 100% of them trying to trick them?
it's not exactly designed to trick them. The model should answer those prompts as well. So in the real world, you would also maybe give a model a prompt maybe that it should answer, but it won't for some random reason.
So essentially what you're trying to say is that these prompts are reflective of real world
Yes.
prompts, right?
Yes.
So at a 60% rejection rate, that model essentially becomes useless.
It does become very less usable. Yes.
So the other question I had was, we have ASR, delta ASR, and ORR.
Yes.
What about delta ORR? Have we measured delta ORR?
I did not measure delta ORR because the delta ASR is, sorry.
Because we might have a positive effect of fine tuning, that we get a lower ORR as a result of fine tuning, which
Yes.
could be a good measurement to have.
Which could be a good measurement to have, yes. I did not measure the delta ORR, so compared to the base model,
Yeah.
yes, that's a good observation as well, so that's something I'll note down. Maybe that would be a finding as well, yes.
And none of this is to pressure you, this is curiosity, right?
No, of course, that makes sense, perfectly makes sense.
Alright, so I'm gonna let someone else.
So different companies can have different and people in general have different definitions of what is harmful. So, for example, Google and Meta might disagree on if a model should produce offensive language or if that's considered harmful. Do you think there is differences in how these companies might view, this is like another speculation question,
Yes.
on how they might view harm and what should be allowed in that in turn would affect the model differences at all?
Yes, it would be, because I think the over-refusal metrics do reflect that here, that maybe the inherent safety alignment in Quen is like much more potent or like much more, it's been trained to like not go against its safety guidelines, whatever the matter. The same would be the case with 5.4, again, Microsoft trained model, maybe, and it's something like, it's a result I personally experienced with as well, like in my own real world usage with this model. But then again, these models, the other models are more prone, but that could also be attributed to how they've progressed over time. So these models, the ones that are more, have high ASRs, are also slightly older models. So as you can see, the Gemma 2 model is from early 2024. The Quen 3 model is late 2025. 5.4 is also late 2025. Maybe their safety limits were strengthened over time to reflect like the changing landscape, maybe. So, and it does result in more over refusal, yes, but yeah, that could be a reason.
Another follow-up, or not follow-up, but when you were running these attacks, it starts off with a prompt in general, and then it tries to modify that prompt so it gets the LM to comply with that.
For the pair attack, yes. Are you like mentioning a specific attack or?
Well, for any of them.
Yeah.
So we can start with paired.
Mm-hmm.
Did you measure to see, and maybe this was a misses at the ASR, if they naturally just allowed something before pair even tried to modify it?
So yes, pair actually works. So pair's approach is, it has a cap of how many mutations it can perform on any model, on any prompt. I think the cap was 20 in this case. It would obviously, I did not check if it would allow the first iteration to pass through. That is something maybe that I could check for pair in this case, but I know that of all the subsequent iterations, like even after if the first one failed, it would just iterate, change maybe the semantics of the prompt a bit. If it passes right away, and it records the ASR value.
Right, because that would be, I'm just thinking, comparing it to traditional adversarial attacks, they first check to see if it already is misclassifying it, and if it is, then you can't really count that as a successful attack, it's just the model was already failing.
Okay.
For that.
That would make sense, yes.
So I was just curious, I was trying to think, well, how could you link it if there were checks to see if it was already failing? Then the attacks aren't really succeeding, it's just that the model,
It's just prone to failure.
yeah, it's not as attack success, it's
Yes.
just,
That would make sense, but in this case, like, seeing how some of the models had very low ASRs and high refusals, they would also point towards that maybe even if pair were to use all those 20 iterations, it still couldn't succeed. And of all our attacks, like deep inception comes first, and pair is very closely tied with our prompt here, so it would indicate maybe that it did require more iterations. And even though there might be some first cases that sounds like the adversarial string itself goes in and you don't need to modify it, but it would point to like pair being useful. Yes.
I guess my last generic question is, because I don't think you specifically stated in here, and so this is just a curiosity question. Because you mentioned quantization, that Laura does quantize some of the information, but because the point of your paper is if you start trying to make these different models more efficient or whatever, that you can potentially have a safety risk, right?
Yes.
But does pure quantization itself pose a safety risk? And is pure quantization different than LoRa, Q-LoRa, or just full-on fine-tuning?
It is different than those approaches, yes, because you're not modifying the weights, values of the weight, but you're reducing the precision that exists. So it does indicate that it is nearly neutral. Like there's a very small effect here for base 4-bit, like almost 2.4, but it was found to be non-significant in nature. But it also points to the fact that just quantization alone can be like potent in some models families, so it's not guaranteed to be like lower in value than the other attacks. There are anomalies like mentioned here, but overall across different models and across different methods, so across compared to fine tuning compared to QLoRa, maybe it is generally lower than those. Although it has the highest, it has a very high variance as you can see here. Yes.
Thank you.
Can we go to slide 13?
Yes.
So we have this matrix of fine-tuning methods, and we have our models, right? And then we have mean delta ASR, right? So I see some negative values here.
Yes.
Are those statistically significant? If yes, does that mean that we've improved on the safety accidentally?
In this case, LoRa, I do remember it being, yes, statistically significant. Compared to the base version, it did improve here, the LoRa on Llama 3.18b. It was statistically significant, yes. I don't remember the
Gemma 2 as well, if you look at base 4 bit.
Yes, sorry, Gemma 2. I do remember this one being statistically significant,
Okay.
not Gemma 2 one.
Okay, so if you check, if they turn out to be statistically significant, then that's a finding you can put into your thesis. It's an accidental finding, but it is a finding because you've had. And then you can even, future work could be to reverse engineer why did you get a statistically significant improved safety,
Yes.
right?
I think it would also be like helpful to, so like I mentioned, there's techniques such as safe LoRa. They also plan to like try to make the model safer by using an adapter like a LoRa adapter on models. Maybe comparing it just a base LoRa fine tuning like I did here. It also results in a defensive almost result on the Llama model here. Maybe comparing it to that as well and seeing like how it takes it further, and like if you just need a quick safety verification, you can also just do this.
So safe LoRa is not meant to fine tune your model for downstream tasks, right? It's just meant to improve
It's
safety.
meant to improve safety.
But this is not meant to improve safety, it is only for fine tuning
Yes.
for downstream tasks,
Yes.
right? So why is this giving you better safety? And safe LoRa, that's its job, right?
Yes, that would obviously have perhaps higher. It definitely would have higher
Yeah,
values.
but this could lead to trying to figure out why is this happening. Can we exploit this somewhere in the algorithm?
Yes.
Can we concurrently fine tune for downstreaming tasks
Yes.
while improving safety?
Mhm.
That could also come into future work based on this observation if you find those two data points statistically significant.
Okay. Yes. Sure.
That's a good point. That's like a whole nother thesis on
Yeah.
why does gamma 2 increase upon quantization, right?
Mm.
That's a fascinating future work right there. And to your point, what is it about the way that it's constructed that we can then learn and import to all the other LLM models?
Definitely.
If no one has questions, can I go with some more?
Sure.
I mean, there are audience members if you guys have questions. Alright, then I'll go. Alright, so I was also very interested in RQ4,
Yes.
the evaluation baseline. So,
Yes.
so there's two ways to do it. One is you get like automata to do it like an LLM, or I'm assuming you're using LLMs as
I did
judges?
use an LLM here for. So are you referring to? Sorry, could you just rephrase that again? I didn't understand. Like, what are you asking? Like in terms of what I'm using LLMs for?
LLMs to calculate ASR.
Oh, to calculate ASR.
They're judges.
Yes, I did use a. So I had a spreadsheet basically of the. I would have a binary classification like 1 for yes and 0 for no, and a spreadsheet would just record that basically like across, for example, this attack, this model, this data set. This is the ASR value. These are the individual behaviors. Like this behavior was counted as yes jailbroken. This was counted as 0. Overall, the ASR values comes out to be this. I would like make sure to verify if that value is.
How much human intervention is there? Because these
Yes.
automata, they might be making mistakes. And is there something else apart from LLMs that we can use for automated judgments?
Human annotation is obviously much more closer to the real world,
Mhm.
but it requires much more time, resources. I personally did only 100 annotations myself. Make sure
100 out of how many?
100 annotations out of it would be potentially like more than 2,000
5%.
maybe. Yes.
Okay. So I think at 5% that's a statistically significant sample. It's random, right? It wasn't.
It is random.
It's random, right?
It is random, and yes, it was random.
Okay.
If I remember properly.
My next question. So my next question is: so RQ4 is trying to see if evaluators agree and how good these evaluators are in themselves, right?
Yes.
So we see that Llama is the best with an 81% accuracy and precision, right?
High precision, higher accuracy than the others.
But why is this false negative rate so high?
yes,
That's a problem.
that is a problem. Like that is a limitation of using LLMs as judges.
And
in
the
itself.
FPR is so low, that means it's going in one direction. It's basically saying,
It's very conservative. in its
yeah,
solution.
exactly. It's very conservative. So it's flagging, it's over flagging.
Under flagging, because the false positive rate is very low.
False positive rate is very low. So,
So-
a false positive here means that something that is an attack
Yes. So
is
and
being
that-
classified as not an attack.
So, no. If you were to conduct the output is, for example, dangerous in its nature.
Mhm.
GPT-4o would say one for yes, it is a jailbroken output. Yeah, Llama 2 would do the same. If an output results in a gibberish attack, gibberish output or something that is not helpful, so the model refuses to comply with the request,
Mhm.
chances are that GPT-4o mini would still classify it as being jailbroken. But that's the precision result. So, for the false negative, even if it was jailbroken,
It wouldn't figure
it wouldn't figure it out. Llama 2 would say, okay, it would assign a 0 value even if it was supposed to be 1.
So a low false positive rate basically means that 3.2% of the malicious attacks were undetected, right?
Yes, they remained undetected.
Yes. So essentially, it's flagging more prompts as malicious.
The malicious prompt is more prone to flagging them correctly.
Yeah, correctly. But if it's not malicious, then it's more there's a high probability that it says that it's malicious. So 45% of non-malicious prompts have been flagged as malicious. Right?
Yes, so if there is a malicious output, I think the false negative rate would refer here as if there is a malicious output, it would classify as being non-malicious in nature actually.
False negative.
If I'm correct, I don't know.
Negative would basically mean here that it's not, it depends on how you define it actually. So how have you defined it?
I've defined it as being like if the output was actually harmful and the model actually said it was not harmful, so that would count as it would count in the false negative.
Okay. So basically you're saying a negative is an attack, a positive is a benign prompt, right?
A positive is a bit.
It's
I
trying.
think he's just saying that it's recognizing that is it determining the output being, recognizing it as an attack or a non-attack, right?
Yeah.
It's not actually creating it, it's just trying to determine was it
Was
an
it
attack or
classified
non-attack.
correct?
So when we say
Correct,
FPR is high, what are we messing up on? Are we messing up
We
on?
are having, so FPR being high means, so it goes closely with the recall as well. So the recall value high being means that of the, so 100% real outputs that were actually harmful outputs from the models. 89.5% were correctly classified by the GPU 4.0 mini as being harmful. So it was correct getting those. 89.5 of those it was correct in getting. But 69.4 of the non-harmful outputs, it actually classified 69.4% of them as well as being harmful, even though it was not supposed to.
Okay, so we'll get back to this,
Yeah.
but based on these inputs, there is clearly a problem with Llama. It has such a low FPR and such a high FNR,
Yes.
and the highest accuracy. It's probably not the best one amongst these, is what I think based on this data. It's overdoing one end, either depending on how you've classified positives and negatives, it's either over flagging or under flagging.
It is under flagging.
So it is
that
under
would be
flagging.
correct, but it is not as bad as being over flagging, which GPT-4.0 mini is doing, which actually results in much different results and not being able to make any. So that does result, obviously, maybe having a high FNR would conceal some results we don't know about. But having a higher precision would also mean that we're actually flagging the correct jailbroken attacks as correctly as well.
What's the split in your data? How many are jailbreak attacks and how many are benign? Is it 50-50?
Professor, so I used two data sets. One was the harm bench, one was the jailbreak bench. Of the harm bench, the data set uses 400 adversarial prompts. All of them are adversarial. And jailbreak bench also uses 100 all adversarial.
Okay.
And then jailbreak bench has a different subset. Like, I wouldn't even call it a subset. It's a different set, but also comes under jailbreak. The providers of jailbreak bench. It has 100 benign prompts, which are like supposed to be reflective of the real world and supposed to be answered by the LLM, but if the LLM does refuse to answer them, it results in a high ORR value.
So basically 500 benign and 500 adversarial and 100 benign. Yeah, so then accuracy is not the best metric in that case, because the data set is skewed, like 84% of it is adversarial. So if, let's say, I have an evaluator that calls everything adversarial, it will end up with 84% accuracy.
Sorry, could you repeat that one more time?
Yeah, so I don't want to confuse you, I don't want to get, I mean, this is good, there's nothing wrong with this is just my curiosity, right?
This is also only the 100 compared human samples.
These are
Oh.
across the 100 annotation studies.
Oh, this is,
compared to
fair enough. Then what I was saying doesn't apply.
And also these classifiers are classifying just if the attack was successful, not necessarily if it's adversarial prompt or not.
So
But
these
yeah,
are
I still
like
think there could be,
Yeah, so this wasn't across the 600, this was across the
across
100.
my 100 annotations and how reflective my annotations are across the.
From the ones that you annotated, how many of them were adversarial and how many of them were benign?
I didn't check that myself, but I did have these comparative metrics.
So you could actually
Maybe I
do
could-
that, and
yes.
then you can figure out which one's the best. I mean, you can really crunch these numbers. If it's a 50-50 split, then the accuracy becomes a good metric.
Mhm.
Otherwise, you'll have to use,
I do believe it was going to be more on the side of being positively jailbroken than.
Okay, then you'll have to use the other metrics to figure out which is the best. For me, it's not very clear because I'm seeing, at least Llama Guard 3 looks balanced to me overall
Mhm.
compared to the other two.
I do get that it does seem like as a mixture of the both of the two.
Because it's hard for me to figure out who's the best out of these.
It's
But-
just that,
These are the results.
yes, it's just that given the task at hand, it was like I believed it to be more positive, like more helpful to rely on an evaluator as being primary, which would like under-report rather than over-report,
Okay.
because that way you would have like you wouldn't have false classifications as a result, or like not like wildly anomalous results, which were like you would have more conservative results basically.
there's a difficulty too with how harm is defined, right? 'Cause
What's different?
how harm is defined. And so you see, if you have humans, there's no guarantee you're gonna have a better agreement.
Because two humans could also label them differently.
Definitely.
Two humans very often disagree. definition. Even in my class, and this is, this is
Yes.
not a true study, but in my class, whenever I go through hate speech or hate speech and ethical AI, there's no
No consensus.
agreement on,
It's hard, right?
what's hate
How are you gonna
speech.
arrive at the truth then? It's subjective.
It can be subjective, maybe
I-
having as many.
And I mean, that's the whole issue as well, is it subjective, is it not? That's,
Mm.
we're gonna have differing.
Another research
ethical-
avenue is truth subjective.
That's ChatGPT.
All right, I'm done with my questions. So if anyone else has any, so.
I'm good.
Good.
Alright, so.
Okay, so then could we have Salif and other audience members please step out?
Sure.
For a bit, please don't go too far.